Okay. Are you on the screen that has the four arrows?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so you may just have to manually move it that way. So if you'll just press the arrow to the left, it can go.
Here it goes. Okay. And then down?
Yes.
You are so
There you
smart.
go.
I think I don't know who it's pointing at, but it's not, it's not in the air anymore.
No, it looks like it's at the students now, so
Okay.
you should be good.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. And I can't, Lubbock and Plainview, can you, hear me and see me?
Lubbock can hear and see you.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Excellent. Here I am again, having to shift things around. We've had some problems. We've had to switch monitors and they've had to rewire everything. So, my lighting is a little different. Miss Beth, finally in the campus mail,
Huh?
I got Unit 3 exam papers.
Oh, when?
Yesterday or maybe Friday, anyway.
Well, they just appeared, huh?
They were stuck somewhere, yeah.
Okay, I'm so glad.
Just wanted to let you know that.
Okay.
So I wasn't worried about it, but it's just nice to know that something you send gets where you want it to be. All right. Hope everyone's doing well. It's been that kind of time. And I'm sorry, I'm moving my things around here. Y'all forgive me for just a moment. Come on in. Hey, doing all right? Good to see you. So hard freeze, huh? How's that for the flower market? Yeah, there you go. All right, very good. All right. Before we get started, I want to recognize one of the classmates here. I won't put you on camera, Johnny, but you have a classmate who just competed in the Pan American Games and won second. And her performance, they sent me a clip of it, is truly amazing. And she also broke the record for the school and her country, Grenada. So let's give her a hand. Truly amazing to be chosen and then to compete at that level. And she just took off. It was like everybody else was in slow motion in that clip I saw. So I'm proud of her and want to recognize that. I'm here today. I wasn't sure the other day if I would be. My wife has been sick this last weekend. She's never sick. I'm the one that's sick. She's the caregiver. So we had to switch roles, and I did that the best of my ability. Probably not as well as she did, or would when she was taking care of me. But I'm just glad to be here. Today is our last day together, and as far as lecture, but we will meet on Thursday, this coming Thursday, which is the 9th, right? Today is December 7th. I want to talk about that in a moment. But we will meet regular class time Thursday, and then you'll have time to look over your notes, and then we'll take the final exam, which is just like a unit exam, right? It's not going to be comprehensive. So you don't come next week. You can come by and say hi to me next week, but no, you won't. We won't meet. Bless you. We will not meet next week. And here you go. Yeah. All right. I've been doing that with my wife all weekend, but she is better, and I'm very thankful for that. And things are getting back to normal at the Hope House. I want to jump into this where we left off last time. If you need a final review and you might have missed the other day, I have some here, and you can mark those up. Let me make a point about something. When you look at the review and make your notes or highlight things or whatever, don't just, I'm glad you're back. Everything went well? Good. There, they tied the knot, huh? All right, very good. I'm glad you got to be there. When you take this review sheet, and one of the reasons I don't give them out till we finish the lecture material is that people are doing this the whole time, and they're not looking at the screen. And I'm not testing you over the images. We used to have to do that in art history class. They'd show you an image, and you had to describe it, tell the date and the artist and so on. That's art history. We're not doing that. But I think it reinforces, and I don't use the canned presentations that they provide me. I try to go way beyond that, up and above or whatever. So don't get totally focused on your paper and pay attention to the images, because I think that will help make sense of everything. So I'm going to pick up and finish the review for the final review today. And we just kind of got started last time in the Renaissance, so we'll pick that back up. But I've got to show this and say this because today is December 7th. Does anyone know what that means? It's Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. And December 7th, 1941, President Roosevelt said in a famous speech, you may have heard in history class, the day that will live in infamy. And the Japanese pilots, bombers, bombed U.S. installation in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and thousands were killed that day. And the reason I'm saying that is that I always say we shouldn't ever forget those things that really gave us our freedom. And I emphasize this always, that those men and women who are part of the effort in World War II in this country and countries all throughout Europe and the Mideast, Far East, everywhere, they saved the world. They really did. That's not an exaggeration. But I want to show you something that I put together last night because I have a special connection to someone who was there at Pearl Harbor. And so I want to show that and see if I can get to this and get my connection correct there. There we go. And show you this. It's not long. So the USS Arizona Memorial is a memorial that was built where the ship sank and where it was bombed. And over 1,100 men died there that day. Young boys, most of them. And they were just inducted into service. Y'all okay? And no one had any idea that the Japanese were going to attack us there. But they made a memorial there. Now I'm showing you this stove, Mr. Hope, what's this about? Well, this is our stove that we've had for years. And this is a tap-in stove, and I posted these slides on my Facebook page last night. I had several women lusting over the stove and said, if you ever want to get rid of that stove, let me know. But this was made, it's older than me, it was made in 1951. It's what's called a Silver Anniversary Special. Tappan made it, and they made it to last. It has all this stainless steel in it. It's a beautiful range, gas range, and we use it every day. It works perfectly still. The clock doesn't work. I need to work on the wiring and replace that, but otherwise it still works perfectly. Now this stove I show you because, not just because it's a cool stove and it's in our home, but it is because the stove was owned by, originally, a man who lived here in Levelland. His name was Frank Cabanis. He was friends of my father-in-law and mother-in-law, and he lived here and worked for one of the oil companies, Amoco, I think, then. And so we went to their moving sale when he retired, and we bought this stove, and I think we only paid like $125 for it. Not bad at all, even in those days. And so we bought the stove, but the thing about Frank Cabanis was he was serving aboard the USS Arizona. He was one of only a little over 300 men that escaped that day. He was blown off the ship. He went back and helped rescue several of the shipmates that were in the water, some that died anyway. And he said, I always felt badly about surviving because I should have died with my buddies that day. So this is what it looked like when one of the bombs hit the Arizona and hit the munitions that were there and just exploded in this fireball. And it's amazing that anyone survived that. But the memorial is there, and have any of you been to Hawaii to see this? I've never been. You have been? So you've been out to the memorial? So what did you think? Yeah. Yeah, a very, very moving thing. Tonight on PBS there's a special about when they decided to make the memorial, because the ships were sunk there and they're still leaking fuel, oil, and so on. But you see remnants of them. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, when they decided that they would make the memorial, Elvis Presley he loved America, and he gave a benefit concert, and a lot of the money that helped build that memorial was raised by Elvis Presley. And there's a PBS special tonight at 7 on that. And then at 8 o'clock they're going to have a special about someone whose ashes were brought back to the Arizona. And here's the fuel oil that's leaking out still, kind of cool, and the rainbow colors on the water. But that's just a reminder that the ship is buried there. And all of these names here are men who lost their lives that day. That's chilling, isn't it? And so Frank Cabanis was one of those Marine Corps officers. He was just a private, first class. But when he died, he had told his family, he said, I should have been there, and if it's possible to bury my ashes there, I'd love to have my ashes scattered there. Well, the U.S. government started a program where they would do that. And he was only the second person after he died. He lived in Louisville, Texas. But they cremated his remains and then took his urn. His family took his urn there. And this is the Rifle Honor Guard that attended the ceremony there at the USS Arizona. And that's the ceremony there. And it's positioned on these pontoons right over where the ship was and the profile of the ship there. But that's his son giving his urn with his ashes in it to one of the divers, and then they placed those down in the ship remains, and that's his family putting flowers on that. And it's pretty poignant thing. We don't need to ever forget these people that gave so much and sometimes gave all. But I wanted to show you that. I think it's really a great thing that we have that stove, and it's a beautiful stove, gas range, that'll probably outlast us. But the thing about it is that it's, let me get my camera switched, there we go. The thing about that stove is, it's every day it reminds us that, are we gonna have this happen again? Here we go. Okay, it reminds us that, there's someone who gave their all for our country, for freedom, for liberty, for everyone. I'm gonna plug this in and see if we can just get on this now, and, we may not be able to get where we need to be, but let's see if we can get back to where we were. I may not be on screen, but that's not the important thing, is get this presentation going. Yeah, final review, and this is where we were the other day, so I'm gonna pick up where we left off, and if you've got your review and you're looking at it, I'll try to refer to, where we were. We were beginning to talk about the High Renaissance, and so that's on the first page if you're looking at your review. And y'all seeing that a little more clearly? It's finally loading there. So let me scroll down here just a bit and pick up where we were, I think about right here, because we were talking about this. The bonfire of the vanities. Let me emphasize that again. So let's start here and look at this. Bonfire of the vanities is not in your text, but it should be. It's been in some previous texts, and it's forgotten. There, if you do a search for this term, you'll find a movie that was made in the 80s that was the same name. But the real bonfire of the vanities, because they said everything that's not for the church is vain and it's corrupt. And so instead of these humanistic statues and these things that were mythology from ancient Greece and so on, it had to be burned. Well, that's what they did. That's what this carving shows. They piled them all in a pile in the middle of the city, in other cities, not just Florence, and burned them. But eventually, people rebelled against that, and they said, "You're destroying beautiful artwork." And so Savonarola was held on trial. He was the priest that did this, and his followers, and they were actually burned, which is horrific to think about. Now, let's go to Leonardo da Vinci. And I'm not going to give you page numbers exactly of your text, but let's just follow along here and look at this. This is some of Da Vinci's inventions. They say he invented the modern tank. Well, he invented a version of armored vehicle. Look at that device pulled by horse with these rotating scythes that would have cut down the enemy. He was a gentle person, but he had some pretty devious ideas about how to fight the enemy, and he was trying to sell these to different leaders. Here's the most famous painting that Leonardo ever did in most people's eyes, the Mona Lisa. People say, well, you know, what's so beautiful about her? She doesn't even have eyebrows. But is it a smile? Did she have bad teeth and she was afraid to smile? You hear all kinds of things about this. But this is one of the masterpieces, and it's in the Louvre in Paris today, even though he did this as a commission for a wealthy merchant there in Italy. He carried it with him when the King of France had him come and work for him. And so that's why it ended up in the Louvre, because Leonardo died. It says 1503 to 1505. He actually worked on it longer than that, and he never felt like it was exactly what he wanted to do. But you see that atmospheric perspective, the aerial perspective in that, just the way he treated the figure, and this idea of what that smoothness of the blending of light and shadow. Sfumato is what they call it in the text. But that's a typical Leonardo thing. This thing is under heavy guard. It was stolen in the early 1900s and went missing for a while. It was going to be held for ransom, but it's behind bulletproof glass now, and it's in a case in the wall. It used to be in a case that descended down into the floor at night into a vault, but they've got it even safer now. This is in Milan, Italy, in the upper part of the boot of Italy. And this is a church, Santa Maria delle Grazie. But on the left there, you'll see where they have the dining hall for the priests and the monks that stayed there. And that's where they did this painting. But that was almost damaged, completely destroyed in World War II by a bomb. And thankfully they had sandbagged and put all this support that you see on the right here to protect this painting. And this is a slide that I got off an old text, but you'll notice that it's reversed, the image, even though they put the text correct. But look how large that is. And you see a doorway down below. They cut a doorway through there at one time just for convenience of serving the meals in there. So here is the place where they would eat their meals, and Leonardo did this painting of Jesus with his disciples. And it's just at the moment, now that's what it looked like in the 1970s, because it had mold grow on it. They put a curtain in front of it that scraped off part of the fresco. And Leonardo did some experimental things on it that caused some problems. But this is after restoration. And this is where Jesus says to his disciples, one of you at this table will betray me. And they're all looking at each other. It's like big drama, because it's in, Lord, is it me? And of course, Judas, who's the fourth figure from the left there, or maybe the fifth figure, that's in blue with the pointy beard, he's holding the money, and he's the one that did betray Jesus. But you can see they went in and did all this scanning of this and digitally scanned it. But look at the details that are here that we don't usually see. And Leonardo did this huge painting with all this detail, and even in its condition, it's still considered one of the greatest masterpieces of all time. And the way he did the figures and the way he painted Christ. And behind Christ, there's a building with a steeple on it that they discovered when they did the scanning. Now, the other Ninja Turtle, right? Michelangelo. Michelangelo, or you hear people say Michelangelo Buonarroti, Florence, did this Sistine Chapel ceiling, and we'll talk about the Last Judgment painting there in just a moment. But Michelangelo wrote, and this is his writing there, and he did this drawing of himself. You see depictions of this where he's lying on his back, but he describes it where he stood and he leaned so far back so he could see what he was doing and he could move around instead of lying on his back. And he said it ruined his back. His back was never the same. The scaffolding was several stories above the floor. He fell off the scaffolding at one time, but he said his back was really never the same from bending back for years doing this painting for the Pope. He tried to beg off, and he told the Pope, I'm a sculptor, not a painter. But he did probably the greatest painting ever done. If you ask me, Mr. Hope, what do you think is the greatest painting? Here it is right here. And this is when they restored it, and there was so much controversy. I told you this before, but mainly they just cleaned it with distilled water and an organic solvent to reveal the beautiful colors that Michelangelo put on there. And if you go today, you can see it. And this creation of Adam, creation of man, God giving the spark of life to Adam, is one of the famous panels there. Just incredible. I think I told you this before. You're there and you're looking way up and you can't really see it very well. I wanted to lie down on the floor and there were hundreds of people in that room. I would have been stomped on, walked on, but that's what I really wanted to do. But you can go to a virtual tour. I've got a website, and I didn't put it on this page, but I've got that if you would like to see it. Or you can just do virtual tour, Sistine Chapel, and find it. They did that when they closed the Vatican during COVID, and it's still pretty much closed. But it's amazing, these panels, the Adam and Eve sinning and having to leave the Garden of Eden, and story of Noah's Ark and so on. It's a pretty incredible thing. This is a Mass in 1994. Pope John Paul II celebrated finishing this restoration. But you see on the back wall there, several years later, Michelangelo came in, he was hired by the Pope to do this huge painting of the Last Judgment. And so this is when Christ returns and he decides who's worthy of, who's really, truly worthy of going to heaven and who's going to be cast into damnation. And Michelangelo painted his portrait on the skin of Saint Bartholomew, who was skinned alive, they say, because he wouldn't recant his belief. And so they're showing his portrait there. Just if you go into the main part of the Vatican, you take a little door and go back into the main dome of the Vatican, you can see this, and it's behind bulletproof glass. This is the first sculpture that Michelangelo ever carved. That's that beautiful white Carrara marble. He was a young sculptor, 1499, and people kept saying this person or that person did it. It's the only one he ever signed. He carved on the band. They say he went in one night with a candle and wrote, Michelangelo Buonarroti of Florence did this. So nobody could mistake it. But some crazy guy said he got a message from God that he should destroy it, and he came in with a hammer and broke part of the arm and part of Mary's nose and some of the other things off. So they restored it, but you can't get close to it now because it's behind bulletproof glass. And sad, kind of crazy people that are out there. We've looked at this before. Here's the David that used to sit in the piazza, the plaza out there in Florence, symbol of the city and the strength of the city, and God being their protector. And you have this, and the text talks about these things like this twisted torso, contrapposto. I'm not going to ask you any of those things, but one of the greatest sculptures ever done by Michelangelo, and it's one that's known by everyone, considered one of the best. And here's the youngest Ninja Turtle, right? Raffaello Sanzio, the School of Athens we looked at before, and he learned from those two masters. In fact, Socrates, who's back there, the guy with the beard, was modeled after Leonardo, and the guy with his elbow on the block of stone there is modeled after Michelangelo, both his heroes. You had work like this, and the text shows this, by Titian. Later in the Renaissance, they started to go, instead of more classical, like you saw in these works, where it was going back to the idea of man being a reflection of God, but something more sensual like this, still going with the classical idea. Here's the architecture that was done during that same period, and I'm not giving page numbers, but these are in the text, most of these. But I wanted to show you this. Now, when we were in Europe, and I want to talk about that real briefly here in just a moment, how you could go to Europe. It's on your list, right, to do that, to go spend time in Europe, and it's easy to do. Maybe this is a good time to say this. If any of you want to know how to do this and how to go on a shoestring to Europe, I can send you this, and it's not switching, but there we go. I can send you this web sources, and I've given these out. I've sent them to students before, handed them out, but there are these web sources right here, and some of you may have seen Rick Steves on PBS. You can go to his travel site. He started traveling when he was a young college student. He would work extra jobs and raise money to do that, and just with a backpack. And so his travel guides and his travel site is all about that, how you can see Europe on a shoestring. And that's exactly what my wife and I did. We'd saved for years to do it. When I retired from the high school, we bought good price plane tickets and a train pass in Europe, and we had a backpack and a day bag, and we were off for 6 weeks on our own. We didn't have a travel guide, and you can do it. It's restrictions, nowadays we can have to worry about some things, but we also found that there were places you could meet people that want to host people from other countries, and so we met people, and this is very secure. They screen everybody, so Hospitality Club and freeloaders and couch surfing. We've had people come to Levelland to stay with us at our bed and breakfast from other countries that we met through this. But, if you want this, I can send it to you, or I got some copies here today. Just let me know. And here's a URL site. You can get a train pass for a few days, for a week. We got one for a month. And so I recommend that to you. Plus, I have some other sites on here that some of you might be interested in. But I want to encourage you to put that on your list. It may be when you retire, like my wife and I did, and we saved up enough money to do that. But it was something that was amazing. So we had a car in France. We stayed in London. Let's see. This is our 171 now. Yeah, I'll go back to that map here in a little bit. I'm sorry, got off track there. But we were in France, and then we took a night train, started using our pass to take a night train, a very uncomfortable thing. We should have gotten a compartment. We sat in the regular seats, so it's kind of like a cattle car, and people talking all night. But we finally arrived in this little town of Colmar, France, which is just right across the border from Switzerland. And I'd heard about this altarpiece, and you can see how huge it is. It's kind of elevated there in the church, little church that's been turned into a museum. But I'd heard about this altarpiece that was done by an artist that was one of the great artists, not an Italian, but a German artist, Grunewald. Matthias Grunewald did this crucifixion scene, and this is called the Eisenheim altarpiece. And it's considered one of the greatest works of art. But he wanted to show that Christ had been tortured, that he was dead, and he looked dead here. And here's John the Baptist on the right, and Virgin Mary and John there on the left. But I mean, he was, the Bible says he was not recognizable as a person. This is a little too cleaned up right here. But ghastly, the wound in his side, he's dead. He died one of the most horrific deaths. But Grunewald wanted to show that, the nails in his hand and his feet. But when you open this up and you can see that it shows the whole story from Gabriel announcing Mary would bear the Christ child, to the deposition of him being buried, to the resurrection, and showing that he was triumphant over death. And the Roman soldiers scared to death when they saw his resurrection. So that's one of the things in the Renaissance, these religious pieces were very important. And artists like Grunewald, German artist, it wasn't just the Renaissance wasn't only in Italy. It was in Germany and other places. Here's Albert Dürer. And Dürer is considered one of the great artists of all time, but of the Renaissance. We've looked at his work before. He was just cool, wasn't he? Here's his self-portrait when he was 28. He was doing these amazing works like this. He became very successful. Have you seen this before? My mom used to have a plaque in our dining room. That was the Praying Hands. And they say that Dürer and his friend were going to art school and they were helping each other out, but his friend had worked hard to provide him means to go to school to study art. And he looked at his hands one day, clasped in prayer, and he said, I want to draw those hands. And so it's become a very famous image, this Praying Hands by Dürer, been reproduced in a lot of different ways. And we've seen this before, his skill in doing watercolor and his skill in doing prints. This is a tale from Revelation. This is the knight, the Christian soldier, right? And his faithful dog down below showing faithfulness, and he's meeting temptation and these demons and devils, but he's going to look up there at the castle of the celestial city. He knows where he's headed, and he knows he can get there. And your text has this, Robert Campion's The Merode Altarpiece, and I don't know if I can get back on the page numbers or not. Yeah, this is page 409, not Formula 409, but page number 409. And this is the whole story of Jesus being announced and the Holy Spirit coming and so on. So the symbolism in a lot of these pieces is very important. And symbolism in art has kind of always been there. But you have these artists in other places. These artists are Flemish artists. Flanders was kind of between the border of France and Germany, there in Europe. And so you see these beautiful paintings. But remember, oil paint was just available for a little while. And look at the amazing colors. They were using perspective like it had never been used before. So this is really what we call the High Renaissance. These German artists like Grunewald and Dürer and so on were doing some amazing things with this new medium of oil paint because it didn't dry so fast as fresco or tempera paint. Now, go to the age of Baroque. And if you're following along in your text, we're in the next chapter there, in the next section. Go to the Baroque, and that's page 414 in your text. About 1600 to 1750. Now, one of my professors said this, and I've heard people just groan about this because they've had people say the same thing. We're going to study the Baroque today, and so someone said if it's not Baroque, don't fix it, which is a terrible joke. But Baroque, the word comes from, and I have this in your notes here, the word comes from very elaborate, something very elaborate. So the Baroque was a reaction to an event that happened in 1517. Y'all know about Martin Luther, right? Not Martin Luther King, but he was named after the great Protestant minister who had been a Catholic monk and priest. And he saw corruption in the church. People were buying what they called indulgences. So you could pay your way basically into heaven. Or you could go sin and have this wild time and then go to the priest and say, here's some money, forgive me, Father. And they'd say, it's cool, thanks for the money. And so they were getting wealthy. And Martin Luther saw these things and he said, I don't believe it's right that you have to have the priest interpret the Bible to you. And he said, I think the Bible should be made available to everyone and they should read it for themselves and let the Holy Spirit speak to them. So he had all these 95 things that some people say nailed into the church door. Most scholars think he mailed them. And then they had people that were in conflict, the Protestants versus the Catholics. I mean, it was war. People were put to death because of their beliefs in one thing or another. Y'all with me? So here is the Protestant Reformation happened, and the church said, we've got to get people back because people were leaving the church. They saw the corruption. They knew that this was happening, and this new sort of belief system, Protestantism, came in. And so they said, we need to devise artwork that brings people back to the church. So here's where the Protestant Reformation happened. You see the Lutherans and the Calvinists and the Anglicans were mainly in England. And you had Henry VIII and a lot of crazy things in the Church of England go on. But you had secular art like this, and you have the ambassadors there on one of the pages. I don't have time to show you that weird shape at the bottom, but where this hung, you could walk through and look up at this large painting, and you could see that that's a skull shape stretched out. They call it anamorphic. These people were earning a lot of money, but they were trying to get people back to the church. So they started devising these dramatic scenes, and you remember tenebrism we talked about? So this dramatic lighting like this, it's like on the darkened stage. Here's Caravaggio as one of the great artists. So the church wanted to design artwork, they wanted to design architecture, dramatic scenes like this we've seen before, and Caravaggio did his own version of this. So to bring people back to the church to look at this amazing artwork, and there was peaceful art done during the period too, and it was more about what was the regular people were doing. Here's the inside of St. Peter's, and look how huge this is. Now, has anybody besides me been there to the Vatican? You need to go though, right? And you walk in there, it's just totally amazing. It's like a city in the middle of Rome. It's its own city. They've got their own soldiers. and it's very, very amazing, very secure place. You got the greatest collection of art, and this massive place. But they wanted to astound people by creating more and more decoration, things more ornate. Here's the view of St. Peter's Square. Remember we talked about the obelisk that came from Egypt? And this is where Peter was crucified, so this church was named after him, St. Peter's. And that's this Vatican City, and you can see the outline of it there. There's St. Peter's Basilica, but that's a walled city within the city. It's its own entity right there. It's an amazing thing. But the way that they set up the lighting in here, nothing was normal. Nothing was plain. It was beautifully decorated, and you have these columns like this. When Pope John Paul II died, this is him lying in state. But those aren't straight columns, are they? They're twisted, they're decorated with all kinds of designs and gold leaf. That's gold everywhere. So that was part of the Baroque style. You can go down, there's a set of stairs actually to the right of where you see in this picture about where the statue is, and you can go down those stairs, and a lot of people don't know it. The Rick Steves travel guide says, go down there, no one will stop you, it's perfectly legal, and you can see. And when we were there in 2005, Pope John Paul II had just died a few months before, but we went down. It was very simple. Several flowers were left there for him. If you look at this entombment there and do a 180, you see this little rock wall, and there's a crevice over there where they said the bones of St. Peter were, where Peter the disciple was buried. But all these people gathered outside, and you'll see when the current pope eventually leaves or passes away, they'll have the same kind of ceremony. But look at all the decoration there. That's colored marble and all this amazing, elaborate design there. Now I'm going to scroll through this pretty fast. 200,000 came to Pope Francis, and you can see how huge that is. So it's just over the top, everything. And you see this over the top design on small buildings like this that were part of the church. And inside, your text shows that, but it doesn't show this. Look at the crosses and all that design. Of course, there's the Holy Spirit up there, the skylight, and the dove. It's just amazing stuff. Your text shows some of these things where Bernini told this story in sculpture. St. Teresa said she had this pain in her side. She said that she was being tempted for God, and she was feeling this pain. And so you have these things, I mean, just over the top again. That's the Baroque style. And this is in the same building there. But we looked at this before. You remember Tenebrism, the calling of St. Matthew, all Baroque. And here's the conversion of St. Paul, who was struck blind. And Jesus said, why do you persecute me, Saul? And he was eventually one of the greatest proponents of Christianity. But Rembrandt, Van Rijn, and if you're on the second page in your notes, you'll see all the different things, and down toward the bottom there, Rembrandt and Van Rijn. And in Holland, the Dutch artist was also doing this same Baroque style, this kind of lighting. Here's one of his self-portraits. He did them from the time he was about 12 or 14. A master artist. But again, these scenes of the military, these scenes of scenes from the Bible, and of well-to-do merchants there, and doctors even, in this same Baroque style by Rembrandt. And Vermeer we've looked at before. Here's the woman with the water jug. They say that possibly the camera obscura was used, where they were able to capture images from real life, and he traced that onto the canvas. But that's just, even if he did that, he had to have an enormous amount of skill to do that kind of work. One of his most famous paintings, The Girl with the Pearl Earring. And the word Baroque, if you see at the top of that page, it says it's derived from the Portuguese word, which means an irregularly shaped pearl. the girl's wearing an irregularly shaped pearl. It's not totally round. And you may have seen the movie of the same name. It's totally fictional, but you had Spanish artists that were doing the Baroque style too. And again to glorify the church mainly, but there was Velázquez, or he was Castilian, so they say Velázquez. He was, that's how the Castilians pronounce their words, because they say the king couldn't have a lisp. Anyway, so here's Velázquez promoting Velázquez. And Peter Paul Rubens, your text has some of these. This is coming up right after Christmas. Y'all know the Massacre of the Innocents. It's a horrible thing where Herod said he was going to get rid of this leader that was coming, Jesus. And they'd already fled to Egypt. Angel had told them to leave, but they killed all these babies. But scenes like that are so dramatic, stories in the Bible, that the church wanted to paint them to get people to come and see. But you had also beautiful, peaceful scenes like this, different places. Now, over the top was not enough for Versailles, this room, and I have this on the next page in your text, talking about what happened at Louis XIV and his palace with all these hundreds of rooms and all this opulence became called the Rococo style. But you have the Baroque and the Rococo kind of mixed together. St. Paul's Cathedral in London is this beautiful thing, this beautiful church, and this was saved by people that were up on the roof during the Blitz in England. Thousands of people killed in London and all over Great Britain, but they saved this church. They were up there putting out fires. Look how big that dome is. If you're inside there, those are people around the edge of that. If you get to go, be sure to go to the Evensong service. It's a special thing, and you hear these voices echo in that big dome. Now, I'm going to go to the next thing here, so we got to hurry and get the last chapters in here. So, going from that from the Baroque style to the Rococo, and it ties in with modern art, because the academy that was started by Louis XIV, who said, we want the very best art and we want the very best artists here. And so Louis XIV was called the Sun King. But they had the French Academy. Now here's my map that I was going to refer to earlier. Here's the map we did of Europe. We flew from Dallas to London and stayed there a few days, and then took the Channel. That's the train that goes under the English Channel to Paris. Stayed a few days, and then we rented a car and drove all through France, and then started our train pass, hiked the Alps, went all through the boot of Italy, and then up to Venice, and then on to Germany, and then to Holland, to Amsterdam. So we did that in 6 weeks. I wish we would have seen Spain. I wish we would have seen some other places. But that's what you can do with that Rick Steves guidebook. Now, chapter 19 in your text talks about this guy, Louis XIV. Ain't he cute in his tights, right? He had all the money. He had all the money and all the power, and so he built this mansion with all these rooms in it, but he also collected all this amazing art. And one of his palaces, right smack dab in the middle of Paris, became the Louvre Museum today. And this great collection, and this is the inner courtyard. They put this glass pyramid over there, and you can enter from the street side or from here. And they started this thing called the salon. Now, don't confuse that with the word saloon, but the salon was what the French Academy was, started in 1648. And if you were one of the select artists and you got to show your work there, your career was made as an artist, but not that many people got in. And you had to paint things like this. And one of the former texts said, this is the Rococo style. Said, this painting was typical of the style, and this man is enjoying the view. Well, we won't go there. Anyway, But you had women and men artists painting like this, and Elizabeth Le Brun was painting her own portrait, but she was painting Marie Antoinette. But this was turmoil. Now, the French had helped us in 1776. They helped us get freedom. But freedom didn't come so easily because they had the monarchy there, and they were fighting to preserve power. Marie Antoinette had her head cut off right in the middle of Paris by the guillotine. And you had this turmoil going on. So Napoleon came in, and things didn't get much better. But he loved artists that showed the glory of ancient Greece, and he identified with that. So you had Jacques-Louis David painting paintings like this, these Greek brothers that took an oath to die or try. And all but one of them did die. This is a story from ancient Greece that really did happen. But you had this style that came over to America, this sort of classical idea. You see the columns there and the shapes that were from ancient Greece, but sort of revived. And so Thomas Jefferson had studied in Europe, and he came back and built Monticello. And his influence to do our U.S. Capitol with this same classical style was very prominent. Here's liberty leading the people. If you've seen Les Miserables, have any of you seen that? It didn't. Watch that movie. It's pretty tragic what happened in Paris. And of course, Napoleon went to Spain, and you saw things like this happen. The rich people got richer, and the more powerful people got more powerful, and the poor people just kind of went by the wayside. Here was this ship off the coast of Africa, and it ran aground. It had very well-to-do people on it and poor people. Well, the well-to-do people were rescued. The poor people had to make a raft out of what was left over from the ship. And this guy named Theodore Géricault painted this huge painting called The Raft and the Medusa. And you see, if you look at that painting, just on the right, on the horizon, there's a ship coming to rescue the poor people. But this painting became very famous because it was the poor people need to be paid attention to. And they revolted against the royalty, against the very rich. Napoleon was eventually exiled and some say poisoned. But you had this kind of style that developed here during this time, and people were focusing on the normal people, everyday workers. And here in America, you had Henry Tanner doing this painting of this man. You had photography come in. Here's this one of the only photographs of Abraham Lincoln and Tad, his son Thomas. But instead of paintings like this of ancient Greece mythology and paintings like this, there was a group of artists that said, we're not satisfied with that. They wouldn't be accepted into the French Academy. And I want you to look at this composition, okay? Can you see this, Taylor? You see this composition? There was a guy named Edward Manet. Do you see the difference? Not much difference there, right? The only thing was he scandalized them because he had shown in the Academy, but he said, I want to break the mold, and I want artists to be able to do whatever they want to do, not paint these ancient scenes from Greece mythology. But he took that same composition and scandalized people because here's this woman totally nude with these men having a picnic. And people, that didn't go. So they had the Salon of the Refused Painters, and there were painters like Monet, who was doing this impression sunrise by just doing quick little dabs of color to capture what he saw. I don't know if you saw the sunrise this morning. Anyone besides me? It was amazing, wasn't it? Just beautiful. Yeah, and I went out and took a few photographs, but Monet didn't have a camera that could do that, but he was sitting there with a canvas and painting as quickly as he could, painting all these little dabs of color to capture his impression of what he saw. And so that became the name of this new group of artists called the Impressionists. So here's one of the most famous paintings, Impression, Sunrise, and this group of artists grew up around him. Now here's a photograph of the Rouen Cathedral, and he would set up his canvas and paint until the light changed. Now look at these slides, if you're not looking at the screen. Look at what happens here. He'd paint it a little while, and then he'd take that canvas down and put up another one, paint another scene. And then the light would change, he'd paint another scene. Now, it might take him several days to finish that, but he'd eventually do these paintings of his impression during that period of the day of different scenes. At the same time, Antoni Gaudí, I put in there, you could add all these different things in there, but Antoni Gaudí was doing this style of this new kind of art. Here's Casa Milà. They were going to demolish this a few years ago. Thank goodness they saved it. That's carved stone. That's not concrete. And all this hand-cast railings out of bronze, beautiful stained glass windows. Look at that carving of stone. And he not only designed the outside of the building, he designed the furniture and these amazing ceilings inside. Pardon? Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Can you imagine if they would have destroyed that? Thank goodness it was saved. And can you imagine living in this apartment building? How cool would that be? But it's still lived in. It's still an apartment building. Some of you have seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Okay, so here's Cameron. They go to the Art Institute of Chicago, and he's just standing there. He's looking at this Seurat painting. And he's standing there, and they go, come on, and he's saying, just a minute, and he's just staring. Well, if you ever get to see it, and you see the detail that's put into it, Seurat was doing what's called pointillism. We talked about it before. These little points of color that your eye mixes together to create this scene. And you see he worked on this 3 years to do this big painting. He didn't do all that many in his short life, but this is a true masterpiece. But this new style, we call this post-impressionism, these painters that came along, and we're getting onto the next page now, Georges Seurat, The Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, pointillism, and you had artists like Cézanne that were doing these quick brush strokes, painting realistic things. Van Gogh was a post-impressionist. His style was totally different. He never saw a sky like this, but this is what he felt emotionally. And these huge broad brush strokes, sometimes using his fingers in the oil paint to create that. Yes, Van Gogh did cut his ear off. Some people say it was over a quarrel with a lover, but many people think that from the descriptions and the letters, and he was under a doctor's care for a long time, wrote long letters to his brother, that he may have had what they call now Meniere syndrome. And I think I told you that. I have a friend who lives here in Levelland who has this. She said, I felt like that at times, because no medicine helps enough sometimes. It's such a painful thing in the inner ear and causes all these loud sounds. And sadly, Vincent did this to himself. But one of the most amazing artists, one of my favorites. If you get to go to Amsterdam, go to the 3-story Van Gogh Museum. And all the paintings are all around the world. If you go to Dallas right now, there's a major Van Gogh museum showing in the museum. But you need to see them firsthand. And you have the symbolists and different ones, the fauves, the emotional paintings. Chapter 20 talks about the change in art, but it doesn't show you this. Look how realistic, that almost looks like a photograph, doesn't it? But it was done by this guy named Pablo Picasso, which we know for something totally different. But he was doing paintings like this, imagining what his parents' first communion when they were married was. He wasn't there. But he painted this when he was about 12 or 13. That's how good he was. And his father had taught him, and you see this painting is pretty amazing, but look how large it is. And he was doing this at 13, 14 years old. His dad wanted him to go study art, and he said, you need to go to Barcelona, but they laughed at him. They said, okay, well, you're good, but you've got to do all these drawings of these plaster casts, and it'll take you months to do this. He came back the next day with these drawings. And so he entered the university, and in about a year, he dropped out because he learned all they could teach him. One of his good friends died, and he was very moved by that death and began to do these paintings that were all blue tones. They call it his blue period. But at the same time, he saw this showing of African mask in Paris, and it changed his style. And that's when he invented Cubism, one of the great inventions. He and his friend Georges Braque used those images from African mask and these multiple viewpoints in one painting and created a new style. Munch was doing the same kind of emotional thing with his work, not painting realism. And these artists were exploring color and different things that could happen, not even painting anything, just looking at color and line and what paint could do. And we've looked at the futurists before, remember? And the futuristic sculpture. Now, remember this, and it's on the last, next to last page in your paper there, the Armory Show. In 1913, the armories were left over from the Civil War. It's where they had cannons, and men sometimes would go there before they went to fight. But they had a big meeting room. And this is the first showing. Look at the date, 1913. And we may go a little past 2 today, but y'all hang tight, okay? So I want to finish this up. This was the first time that modern art had been shown in America. In New York City, the Armory Show is a very important show. You don't need to forget it. This guy made it possible. He had been showing some of the modern artists like Picasso and others in his gallery, Alfred Stieglitz. And he became acquainted with a girl that was teaching up here at West Texas State, West Texas Normal College then, and Georgia O'Keeffe. And then they eventually married, even though there's a lot of difference in their ages. But here's her painting of one of the beautiful poppy flowers. And then she moved to New Mexico, north of Santa Fe, began painting landscapes there. And if you get to go to Santa Fe, go to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. You'll see these amazing paintings. But there were artists after World War II, they said the world is going to be annihilated anyway, really as World War II was rumbling through Europe. So they came up with a style of art they called Dada. They just picked a name out of the dictionary, and they wanted to destroy art. And this was one of the things that was shown at the show there at the Armory. So not taking art seriously at all. But then there are artists that were such amazing painters. How about that mustache, y'all? Salvador Dali, and this is a photograph that was taken. They say they suspended some of these things by wires and through this water and through these cats, poor cats. They said they had to do this about 3 times to get the right picture. I don't know how they caught the cats the second time. They should have lit out. Abusing those poor animals, yeah. But Salvador Dali, we've seen the persistence of memory before, and surrealism. So he began to paint in this different style. It was like dream images, nightmare images, but he was also a very devout Catholic. And so here's his Last Supper, and he's showing the crucified body of Christ at the Last Supper, Christ knowing what was going to happen to him. He would be betrayed. In America, you had painters like this, American Gothic by Grant Wood. See the Gothic window? And the windows, in the window, there are Gothic shapes. So this is a very famous American painting. And you had realism of the Depression that influenced art. Your text shows Aaron Douglas' amazing mural painting on canvas showing the black history in America and things that happened to them. Now, abstract expressionists, 1940s to now. I talked to you about the Bauhaus before. Here's the Bauhaus font. This was one of the buildings that survived Hitler. Hitler hated the Bauhaus, and you couldn't get another group of mass murderers together that's more disgusting than this one right here. But they chose art that glorified the fatherland, and this really is disgusting. The White Knight, I don't think so. But they had a show of art that they said was forbidden to show, and it was degenerate art, and you see the word Dada right there, and all these Nazis running around in here. But they auctioned off a lot of these things. What they found out later was they stole a bunch of it and hid it. And in Munich, they found a whole floor of these. Hitler planned this super museum. He was a frustrated art student and architect. This museum was so big it couldn't have ever been built. But he wanted to take every work of art and put it in there. I've told you about this. This is some of them that were found in the salt mine, over 6,000 of them, and one of those was the Ghent altarpiece. That gray panel down there is still missing. Maybe it'll be found one of these days. It may have been destroyed. And you see today, these monasteries like this that have been totally crushed by ISIS and these groups like that. In Umbarger, Texas, if you drive from Hereford to Canyon, you go through this little tiny town. They've got a restaurant and a post office. They've got a Catholic church. They had a prison camp for Italian prisoners of war at Hereford, Texas, World War II. Did y'all know that? And these prisoners found out that they were going to build this Catholic church, and they said, we're artisans, even though we're prisoners, and we'd like to decorate the church. And so they did paintings, they did wood carvings there. That's a picture of them. And I got to meet one of the ladies who was in her 20s then, and she helped feed these prisoners of war when they were doing these paintings. Here's a typical painting of 1934, showing a scene of American stories, ballads, myths, and so on. Thomas Hart Benton. But one of his students was this guy named Jackson Pollock. He wasn't quite as good, was he? Trying to paint the same style. And of course, Pollock was an alcoholic, and he had a lot of mental problems, but he started painting these dark scenes, and then finally started painting these little splatters of paint we call action painting. And they became famous. And they may not appeal to everyone. You have the pop artists like Andy Warhol, who did popular images like Marilyn Monroe and the Campbell soup can. You have the op artists like Bridget Riley. That's kind of wild, isn't it, to look at? These optical illusion things we've talked about before. And you have the modern sculptures. If any of you been downtown Dallas to City Hall, I saw this in an old Walker, Texas Ranger episode the other day. And I would take my students. This is a huge Henry Moore sculpture based on vertebrae, bones. And Deborah Butterfield, we talked about. Her only subject is what? Horses. And this is the one that's on the Tech campus. So you have more modern artists. Some of you may have seen Divine Sea Warriors. Are any of you fans of that? They showed it at an anime festival at Lubbock one time. But those Japanese animation artists were very influenced by Snow White, the first full-length color cartoon animated film, and then Bambi and others like that. Look at the eye of Bambi, though, and that's very much an influence over the anime artist that you see. Now, going back for just a moment to the Academy. This is what the French Academy liked, right? But you have artists that reinterpret that. Now, if you look at this carefully, this is a crane shot looking down on a junkyard, and those round things on the right there, in the lower right, those are old automobile tires. And so Vic Muniz arranged all this junk so you could see this thing. This is in your text. And he did a self-portrait with dirt and leaves and twigs. And then he used chocolate drizzled to make a Last Supper painting. And what more appropriate could he have done than Jackson Pollock dribbling paint by dribbling chocolate on a surface? And he did this picture of Elizabeth Taylor with diamonds. She loved diamonds. So, now, there's so much more I could have told you, shown you everything, but I want you to study your notes. And next time we're going to be together. I'm not sure if I'm going to get my camera back here, but if I don't, I will see you on Thursday. I'll let you look over your notes, and then we'll take the test in class, regular time. Y'all be safe. Make sure to make up any work that you've missed, everyone.